Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Mike, ready to present our webinar today, Mediation in Action, Nightmare Neighbours. This is all about neighbourhood conflict and what we do to resolve it using mediation. So you're very, very welcome to join us here this afternoon, a lovely autumn sunny afternoon in Derbyshire. Don't know how it is where you are. I see we've got people on from all around the UK and all over the world. We have a few international visitors today, which is great to see. So just a very quick word about me before we start. I'm Mike Talbot. I founded UK Mediation 22 years ago, by Jove, as a means of putting some ideas into action about how we resolve conflict, why conflict is so difficult. My own background is in psychotherapy, so my interest and my sort of research is into the psychology of conflict. In a sense, understanding the people who are in conflict as a way of resolving their conflict. So we have a webinar today all about neighbourhood mediation and how to apply the skills and techniques of mediation to resolving disputes between people who, like it or not, have to live next to each other. So the overview of today, we're going to be using a lot of video clips, and we have neighbourhood mediation in action, taking you from a dramatic portrayal of the conflict between two neighbours and what goes on there into the 7-stage mediation model. So looking at the various steps and stages from speaking to the people separately to getting them together for a joint mediation session, all the way through to reaching an agreement between them and what the mediator does all along the way. So we're looking at that model applied to a neighbourhood dispute. It's a very similar model that we use applied to commercial disputes, workplace disputes, complaint scenarios, and all manner of disputes between people. In this case today, we're talking all about neighbours, and we'll be using the time today to allow for a bit of Q&A. So at the end there'll be some opportunity for you to ask a question, hopefully get an answer, or maybe make a comment if you wish. Also along the way there's a chat box on the screen, so you're very welcome to use that facility to comment or ask a question if you're watching the recording, or if you want to share this with friends and colleagues for later on, they can also comment on the recorded version of the webinar. So here we go. Let's think about neighbourhood mediation in action and our dramatised neighbourhood conflict between two individuals, Carl and Alex. There is a preamble on the video clip I'm about to show you, so I'll shut up, I think, and let you see the conflict between Carl and Alex and how this neighbourhood dispute blows up.
Carl and Alex are residents in a block of flats belonging to the housing association. Alex has lived there for about 5 years, while Carl moved in around 6 months ago. There are some ongoing disputes between them to do with use of the common areas, noise disturbance, and most annoyingly for Alex, the use of the allocated parking spaces outside the flats.
Again.
So there we go. So what is going on with Carl and Alex? Some of the fairly typical characteristics of a neighbourhood dispute there. So one of the things that's going on with these two guys is you have a relatively new tenant versus an established tenant. This is often one of the ingredients in the mix of a neighbourhood dispute. So we often hear when we are talking to people about their neighbourhood disputes, one will say, yeah, and she's only been here for 2 months, the rest of us have been here for 10 years. And this is what we're hearing there with Alex, who's complaining that the fella she's got issues with is a new tenant while the rest of them are quite established. Classic thing, ingredient in the conflict is a noise disturbance, and this might come from noise from music, noise from DIY, noise from kids running around in the flat above, dropping toys on a hard floor, or it might be noise outside, either late at night or early in the morning, people revving cars up, doing DIY, doing the garden, cutting the grass and the hedge, etc. So noise disturbance, very common factor in people's neighbourhood disputes. And another one is about limited amounts of space for parking. A lot of households have several cars, 2 or 3 cars, and particularly in terraced houses where you've got to park on the road, or in the case of the block of flats that we're looking at with Carl and Alex, there's a few allocated spaces, but there's some dispute over whose space is whose. And the other thing is around communal areas, so there are quite often disputes in terms of leaving stuff in communal areas, people not doing their bit to keep it clean or take their rubbish out or put the rubbish where it's supposed to be. Sometimes the issue is also about leaving the pushchair or leaving the bike or leaving the walking frame in the communal area so it's in other people's way. So what we see there are some of the classic ingredients in a neighbourhood dispute. There are others, of course, and in the summer there's smoke from barbecues, music from people being outside in the garden during the evening, lifestyle issues to do with how people choose to spend their leisure time, and so on. But here we are with Carl and Alex, some classic ingredients of a neighbourhood dispute. And in terms of actions that would be taken by a housing provider, so if it were a housing association, registered social landlord, local authority, could be a private landlord as well actually, but we might think about what their involvement has been. So we would expect that every time there's a neighbourhood dispute, you don't have to go calling a mediator in. It would be the housing provider or the landlord who would take some initial action. And in this case, they might well have received complaints from one and the other. It can be that you get a tit-for-tat complaint between the two neighbours, and one of them chewing your ear on a Monday, the other one chewing your ear on a Tuesday about all the bad things their neighbour's been doing. And there might have been some communication with tenant as well. The authority, the housing provider, might have written to the tenants, had a call with them, may have even had a visit to the properties in order to investigate and to see what's going on. So as often happens, when you go to the property, there's no noise, there's no rubbish in the communal area, the cars are all parked properly. So it's a tricky one. And often there aren't triggers of a sufficient severity that the housing provider has to get involved in a formal way. So then we're thinking about trying to get informal resolution, early local resolution to this kind of a dispute. And then we'd be thinking, okay, so shall we or shan't we use mediation? And in this case, with Carl and Alex, we would say, well, mediation probably would be worth a go. And here at UK Mediation, our approach is try mediation unless there's a reason not to. And there are sometimes reasons not to, but generally, by default, we would say give it a go. It's a very quick remedy. It doesn't involve much formality. There's a referral form which we can do electronically, and then the sessions can often be held over a single day. So it's quite quick, it's quite inexpensive, it doesn't involve too much organisation and formality. So we would often suggest, yeah, try mediation unless there's a reason not to. And in this case, I think it would be quite appropriate because there needs to be an ongoing relationship between these two. Like it or not, they do have to live across the corridor from each other, and they are, in this block of flats, and they're there to stay. So they have to an extent, at least not be in conflict with each other and having a dispute that draws in the housing provider all the time. So they don't have to be friends, they don't have to like each other, but there does need to be some kind of a positive, i.e. non-conflictual relationship between the two parties. In terms of what we're seeing there on the video, the dispute is at quite an early stage, so it hasn't got really entrenched, it hasn't got really vicious, they're not too much at loggerheads. What happens is that when a dispute goes over that line and it gets into hammering on each other's door, putting nasty stuff on social media, starting to write each other letters, starting to act out, what we would call it. So deliberately blocking somebody's access, or deliberately parking across their car in the space, deliberately leaving rubbish in such a way as to annoy your neighbour. This is when it's gone over the line, really, and people start to second guess. They start to mind read their neighbour. They start to say things like, she's got it in for me, he hates me, she doesn't like it because of this, he doesn't like me because of that. So it looks like we're okay. We're not at that stage with Carl and Alex, and as far as we know in this scenario, there's no ongoing formal procedure. Once an investigation or some kind of an enforcement starts, that's when it gets difficult. So if you have your more than just the early stages of your ASB input as well, and it's gone into a more formal process, that makes it difficult to do mediation. So we always say, do mediation early on. Treat it as a very early stage in your dispute resolution procedures. If the neighbours can't talk it out for themselves and they need some help to have a conversation, that is the perfect point at which to bring in an external mediator. So this is what we're going to do with Carl and Alex, bring in the mediators, and we're going to look at the 7-stage mediation model. We're going to walk through each of the stages now with some video clips to illustrate what happens at every stage. So here we start with the initial contact with the first party. It doesn't matter who goes first. The objective is the same, which is to allow some offloading, let them tell their story about how horrible their neighbour is, and we're trying to deduce their interests. What are their underlying needs? What are their underlying concerns? What is it that they want from their neighbour? It might be about getting a good night's sleep, having safe access across the communal area, being able to park your car where you need to, having a better way to raise things with your neighbour if things go wrong. So all of these things would probably be the interests, indeed the common interests of these two neighbours. And once we've spent a bit of time with each of them, which we're going to see in a second, we allow this time for offloading. The mediator is doing a lot of empathic listening, trying to help the person to tell the story fully, to be open and honest about what's going on with their neighbour. And the mediator's not taking sides. You'll notice the mediator not asking loads of questions or making suggestions or trying to deduce what needs to happen or proposing why don't you do this or suggesting why don't you do that. So you'll see the mediator's main job is to hear the story, think about the person's interests, and finally to get their agreement to take it forwards this way. So let's hear from Alex first and see what happens in her stage 1 meeting when she gets to meet the mediator, chance to offload, and at the end of the offloading and the mediator sort of trying to get a good clear handle on what's going on for Alex, then we get her agreement to take it forwards and we can progress into our stage 2. But first of all, let's hear from Alex. What I want to do is to spend this bit of time with you. We've just got time just for the two of us for a private session to hear about things from your point of view.
I bet you're going to go and tell him everything I've said, aren't you though?
And just before I do hear your story, do you mind if I just tell you some of the rules and about how the privacy works and stuff like that? Okay. So first of all, mediation, what it's for is to help a better conversation to happen between you and your neighbour, so you can try and sort things out between yourself and not have sort of conflict between the two of you. And it helps for that if we have this bit of private time, so that you can speak openly and tell me exactly what's going on from your point of view. You can say what you like, and so long as I don't hear anything that's where anybody's at risk or anybody's in danger, everything's kept private. I don't feed anything back to the housing. You might see me write a couple of things down here. It's just to help me remember. I don't keep my notes, and I won't show my notes to anybody. I get rid of those at the end of today.
Right.
And nothing that gets said between the two of you can be used anywhere else either. So
you're definitely not going to go back to him?
I won't go back to him, and I won't tell him what you've said. And the same way when I meet with him privately, I won't tell you what he said either. Well, later on, there's a chance for the two of you to get together and to have a direct conversation between the two of you. Then you can say exactly what you like, or you can say things to me privately.
I don't even want to do that, but yeah, okay.
Okay, you can say things here privately to me now, and you don't have to mention them later. I'll leave it up to you.
Right.
So you can say exactly what you like later on when you meet, but for now you can say anything you want to. Okay. So I'm not here to give you advice about anything or to make any judgments. I don't take sides. I'm not here to say who's to blame or who's at fault, but to help the two of you equally to say what needs to be said, to respond to each other, have a good conversation, and later on, if you do get to the point where you can write some points of agreement down, to help you to do that as well. and I'll say start anywhere and tell me what goes on between you and your neighbour.
I don't even know where to begin with it all, if I'm honest. I mean, I've been here for 5 years and that twat's been here for 6 months, and he's come in, ruling the roost. You know, I'm getting him from work late, he's parking in my space, and I've been here for 5 years. I come up the stairs, there he is, all his bags of rubbish, not one, about 3-4 bags of rubbish. And then, you know, every now and then, you know, maybe twice a week, I have my mates round and we just sort of chill out, music, you know, they're all here, you know, we're having a catch up. Yeah, the music, you know, it might be a bit loud, but it's not on till that late. I mean, 2 o'clock, probably 2 in the morning, but, you know, to me, it's a couple of nights a week. And then it must have been probably about 2 months ago, he came, bang, bang, bang. Not once, about 3 times again, bang, bang, bang on my door. And I thought, I'm not going to go up to the door. No way, no way. I'm just sick of it. I'm fed up of him being in my car parking space. And then it's just the rubbish as well. I think we're going to have mice. We're going to have mice in them communal areas if we don't watch it. And then, you know, all my friends, even my friend said to me, why is your neighbour leaving all them bags of rubbish? And I said, I don't know what his problem is, but he's got a problem. And then the other week, I came out and he's there scowling at me, and I just turned the opposite way because I thought, I can't deal with it. I've been here for 5 years, and all the other neighbours, we get on fine. We really get on fine, and I'm a good neighbour, but couple of nights a week and he's just bang, 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 and then he's ringing them up, complaining about me, and I've had enough of it, if I'm honest. I'm fed up of him. Okay. I really am. Sick to that teeth, that twat. Okay.
So I can hear you're really fed up with your neighbour, you know, you're annoyed and frustrated with how things have been between you and your neighbour, obviously, you know, and you're really at your wit's end by the sound of it. So the things you've mentioned there are about your parking space. You want to be able to get in your parking space.
Well, yeah, I don't want to be you know, 10 minutes walk just to get into my own flat, when I've always had park my car, get out, I've got all my bags, and then I'm in. Yeah. I'm having to walk 10 minutes just to get into my own flat.
Sure thing. So you want to be able to park close, you want to be able to use your own parking space, especially if you're carrying stuff. You don't want to have that delay at the end of your working day.
No, I don't.
To get into the house.
No.
So there we see just how annoyed Alex is about her neighbour, and telling a story in whatever way she sees fit. It may be that the mediator's happy for her to use that kind of language and to come on in that way in the individual meeting. Doesn't really matter. Mediator's heard it before, but we might ask her to just to moderate it a little bit when she gets together with her colleague. We don't mind people expressing annoyance and anger or irritation with their colleague. Sometimes voices get raised, so long as we don't have things like wagging your finger in the other person's face, shouting them down, not allowing them to speak. Some degree of swearing is sometimes acceptable between people. You don't mind that, as long as it's not directed at the person in the way it was there. She's using a word to describe her neighbour that we wouldn't want to hear in the joint session. That wouldn't be okay. So that's how people tell their stories. It's fairly typical. Hearing from Alex, we get her commitment to bring it back to a joint session later on. So now we've got to think about stage 2. We're going to meet with Carl and think about treating him exactly the same as party 1. He knows he's going second, so it's always a bit tricky to gain the trust. So he's already aware that we've seen Alex, so he might be aware of that. And so she's been talking about him, and he would be thinking, well, okay, so she's got your ear first. Gaining the trust can be an extra challenge for the second party by virtue of the fact they're going second. So we have to keep our impartiality. We've got to be careful that we don't get too seduced by the first person's story to the extent that we don't give the second one a good listening to. They both need a good listening to, and it shouldn't make any difference who's going first. And of course, with the second party, we're not passing on the allegations from the first one, because all the second one would do would be refute them and probably come back with some counter allegations of their own. So we're maintaining privacy, not passing things from the first one to the second, as we move into the stage 2, where we hear from Carl and get his side of the story. Just start anywhere really and tell me what goes on between you and your neighbour.
Well, it's not been great the last few months, if I'm honest. Mostly to do with noise, loud music, parties, you know. I know she's a young girl and stuff, but I mean, bloody hell, she wants to go and live in student accommodation, then, you know, landlord's got some round the corner, you know. I want to just enjoy my flat in peace and quiet, without like thud, thud, thud music, girls screaming at all hours, You know, it's not like I'm not trying to sort it out. You know, I've been up, I've knocked, she's ignored me, I've knocked again. You know, I get wound up because I've got work at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I don't need to be interrupted by flipping music all night. It's not on.
So you work quite early shifts?
I do, yeah. I work usually 6 o'clock in the morning, like, so you wake me up at 2 o'clock, I make a mistake at work, I'm going to get sacked on her, you know, and at the end of the day, it's her fault because she's keeping me up all night. So, I don't know, I mean, I don't know, these places are made like cardboard anyway, you know, noise travels quite easily between the apartments. Not help with music at all hours of the night, so she just needs to pack that in really, and then everybody will be happy.
Okay. So you've been unhappy with being able to hear her music coming through the ceiling. You say the places are quite noisy anyway, the noise tends to travel.
Yeah, I mean they're oldish properties, but you know, within reason, I've not had any complaints about my noise. You know, I have my telly on, I have my PlayStation on.
Okay.
I've tried knocking on a couple of neighbours to see if they've heard her play music, and it's like they're all established. You know, they've all been here quite a few years.
Okay.
I'm the Johnny come lately, and I've only been here a few months, and I think they think I'm trying to cause trouble because they all love her. They all love her to bits. She thinks it's lovely.
Okay.
She really isn't.
All right.
Jesus.
That's Carl's story then. Obviously a different version of events than we've heard from Alex, but it's not our job to compare the stories and try and decide who's right, who's wrong, who's telling the truth, who's not. What we're interested in is what are their underlying needs and concerns, what would be the substance of a conversation between the two of them, and have we got their commitment to come to the table and have a discussion with their neighbours. So we move into a third stage where we stop and have a bit of a think about, is this the best way forward to bring the two parties together in a room for a conversation? Sometimes we decide to keep them separate and to do shuttle mediation, so we move from one to the other, back to the first one to the second one. It's a slow way to do mediation and a bit frustrating, but it's sometimes the best thing to do if the temperature between the two neighbours is very high, and if there's any chance of a high level of verbal aggression, and certainly if there's any chance of physical aggression between the parties. We may not bring them together in the same room. And it's just a little side note here about doing mediations online, as we have been for the last 20 months or so. We're just starting to get back to doing face-to-face work now. But when we do mediations online, it's the same model. We speak to people privately, we do a bit of weighing up at stage 3, and then we go into bringing them together at stage 4. It works okay, not too bad. I've always got concerns when you're doing online mediation with neighbours. If it doesn't go well, and you can't predict how it's going to go really, we can have some checks and balances in there, but we never quite know how people are going to be on the day. And if it doesn't go well then, and we come off the Zoom meeting or the Teams meeting, and then those neighbours are physically in the flat next to each other, they're going to see each other in the corridor or outside, or they'll be banging on each other's doors and walls. And I'm concerned as to how we might leave a situation that we tried to mediate online when the parties are actually physically next to each other and they're going to see each other straight after the session. So just a consideration about bringing people together, whether to do shuttle and whether online would be appropriate. And if we are doing face-to-face mediation, selecting a time and place is the next thing. So we want to know we've got somewhere that's neutral, it's got to be accessible, it's got to be convenient for everybody to come to. You're going to be sitting around telling your conflict story and having a discussion with your neighbour. So it needs to be a easily accessible, neutral venue, somewhere away from their flats and with a bit of room, ideally with a separate room as well, so that if we need to have a breakout or a timeout from the joint meeting, then we have another separate space that we can use, preferably a room down the corridor or a little bit away from the main room, so that we can break out or have side meetings if necessary. So we're all ready to go for the joint session, and then we think about, okay, we're going to bring these parties together. And in the case of Carl and Alex, I wouldn't have reservations about bringing them into the same room. They seem quite rational, seem to have their feet on the ground. They seem quite motivated to try and sort things out. So you're going to see in the joint session what the mediator's doing is having some introductions and agreeing some rules. You'll see rules about nothing personally abusive, no personally abusive language, and certainly no name calling, and also trying to take it in turns to speak. I say trying because it's quite difficult when somebody's sort of accusing you of things or criticising your lifestyle to sit there silently taking it. So quite often people will interrupt each other, but we have a rule that within reason, try and take it in turns to speak. What happens in the meeting is after we've got the rules agreed, just a couple of rules, then we go into their uninterrupted time, a chance for each of the parties to speak to the mediator about what's going on from their individual perspective. So they do that equally, make sure that the other neighbour is hearing what the first neighbour is saying and vice versa. And the mediator's job is to hear that, keep order, and then to summarise each party's views and decide on an agenda of issues that need to be negotiated. So in this case it would be about the parking, be about the noise from music, it would be about the communal areas, probably be to do with how they speak to each other if things go wrong as well. So the first part of the joint session, up to getting an agenda, is everything that we're going to see on the video just now. So let's see what happens at the beginning of the session with Carl's uninterrupted time. After we've done all the rule setting and the introduction bit, let's hear from Carl and see what he's got to say about the dispute with him and his neighbour. So there we go. So we're ready to hear from each of you with a bit of uninterrupted time. You get a few minutes each to talk about things that concern you, about what's going on with you and your neighbour. Use each other's names if you want to, and to have just that bit of time to speak without interruption. I'll ask you to make your comments to me to start off with when you have your uninterrupted time, and then later on I'll ask you to speak directly to each other. But for now I just want the comments made to me. Who would like to start?
Okay.
Just a sec. Are you happy if Carl starts?
Yes.
You're all right with that? So I'll ask you. So your job now, Alex, is just to for the two of us to listen to Carl and see what he's bringing this afternoon. So Carl, to me, would you please say what's on your mind this afternoon, and in particular what you'd like to get out of this?
Well, it's fairly black and white really. Loud music at all times till gone 2 in the morning. When I'm at work at 6, shaking my head already, I told you. There's no defence for it really. Like, you can enjoy music at an acceptable level, but at a ridiculous volume as it is, and then trying to sing along to it badly. It's,
I don't know how you dare even say that.
I'm going to pause you a second,
I
Carl.
really do.
And Alex, I would ask you please just to wait until Carl's finished. When it's your go, I'll ask him to do the same. So what I'd like you to do now is just to listen to what Carl's got to say. You'll get a chance to come back on it afterwards, but for now just pause please. I appreciate it can be difficult, but you'll get your go, and when you do have your go I'll make sure that Carl doesn't interrupt you as well. Alright.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. Carl, start again.
what was that, 30 seconds?
So to me, Carl, if you can carry on and tell me what's on your mind this afternoon and what you'd like to get out of this. So there's the part of the session after the rules have been agreed and after the session's been opened by the mediator, where we hear from one of the parties in his uninterrupted time. We're not going to see every bit of the mediation. We've only got a short space of time to do this today. We've just had a question by email from Kerry. Kerry, thanks very much. Can Mike talk a bit more about shuttle mediation? What sorts of things would make him think that having them in the same room wouldn't be appropriate? It's a good question, Kerry, and we have to weigh it up on the basis of do no harm. We're always very careful that no matter what else we do as mediators, we do no harm and make sure that we don't leave people in a worse position than when they started. So in terms of your question, if there was, in meeting the parties separately, if they were saying things like, oh, I don't know if I'll be able to get into a room with him, whether I could restrain myself, or no, I don't want to set eyes on him, or I don't want him to set eyes on me, or if I get within thumping distance of him, he'll be sorry. If I hear things like that, I think, nah, there's a risk there of certainly verbal aggression and most likely physical aggression as well. So in that case, I wouldn't necessarily get them into the same room. Sometimes you can start with shuttle mediation, Kerry, where you've got them in separate rooms or in separate breakout rooms on a video call on Zoom or Teams. And it goes okay when you're doing shuttle. So you say, okay, let's try and bring you together. So you start with shuttle and then you actually do face-to-face mediation. Some organisations, neighbourhood mediation organisations, pretty well do all shuttle. And this is their normal way of working, so it's fine. You can get some good results that way. I find it a bit slow and a bit frustrating, if I'm honest. I prefer to bring people face to face, but like I say, if there's any risk that there would be too high a degree of aggression, or if the parties are not really willing or competent to make agreements or to stick to agreements. So if we get that inkling from them when we meet them separately, that they're either not able or not prepared to reach an agreement with their neighbour or to stick to an agreement that they might reach with their neighbour, then I'd think twice about progressing with mediation at all, and I'd certainly think twice about bringing them into the same room to have a face-to-face session. So I hope that answers your question, Kerry. So let's move on and think about when we've heard from the parties individually, then we're going to think about building an agenda, getting a list of things together, things that need to be discussed. There's no point discussing non-contentious issues. So the mediator will draw out the contentious issues, think about what it is that needs to be negotiated between the two parties, and sort of make a notional list, an agenda of what we'll then take forward into the discussion phase. So thanks for that. So from your point of view, Alex, you know, it's about the parking. It's frustrating to get home from work and find that your parking space has got Carl's car in it. But you've got some ideas there already about what needs to happen about it.
Yeah, you know, it's easy. That can be resolved quickly, hopefully.
Okay, we can discuss that quite. Maybe pick that one first if that's something that can be discussed quite easily.
Yeah.
Also, you're concerned about the rubbish. That you're saying there's bags of rubbish by the stairwell that have come from Carl's flat, and you're concerned both from a safety point of view, but also that's what's led you and other neighbours to talk about what's going on with this rubbish thing.
Yeah, because they've got the same opinion as me about it, with, you know, it being a hazard and its health and safety. Yeah,
and the other thing that needs to be talked about is to do with the lifestyle noise. You know, that you're saying that you do have friends around, there is music playing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a couple of nights a week till 2 o'clock in the morning, and you know,
but,
I didn't realise, you know, what hours you do.
You're saying it's not excessive, and it's 2 nights a week, and it's not massively noisy, but
no.
Yeah, okay. All right, then, great. Well done, the two of you, because now we've got a picture about what needs to be sorted. So, you know, the two of you are bringing along issues to do with the parking. So, from your point of view, you're parking where you're supposed to park, and you're unhappy that you'd had a note off Alex about that. The tone of the note, it didn't suit you at all. But as far as you're concerned, you're doing the right thing with your car. From your point of view, Alex, you know, your space has gone. Your space has been pinched by Carl parking his car there. So I think we can have an early conversation about that, see what's going on there. The rubbish in the corridor, you know, you've got your own perspective on that, Carl, but from your point of view, Alex, it's not only an eyesore, but it's also a safety issue, and it's blocking the access.
Yeah, definitely.
And this is something that has been discussed with other residents, and you're unhappy, you know, that it feels like you've been talked about, or you're the guy who's been here a few months, others have been here a few years, and that's uncomfortable to you as well. And then the third thing is about the lifestyle noise. So you're disturbed because you've been woken up by the noise, and you're saying it's not unreasonable, it's 2 nights a week, and it's not excessive volume. Okay, great. So they're the things that the two of you have brought along today. So a key part of any negotiation is to know what you're negotiating about, and the purpose of building the agenda there at the conclusion of that stage 4 is so that we then know what we have to discuss as we move into the stage 5, which is working on the issues. This is thinking about what to pick first, where we start. Mediator using some reframing. There's quite a bit to say about reframing, but in essence it's about helping the parties, instead of thinking about the past of their dispute and the history of what's gone wrong between them, to think about how they can have a better future to their neighbourly relationship. So yeah, all of this stuff's gone on in the past, and taking it from this point onwards, how do you want things to be different? It can be a tricky thing for the parties, but we start in the individual meetings right from the beginning. The mediator is thinking in a sort of a reframe sort of way. Okay, so you say this is wrong, that's wrong, and that's wrong. What do you need to be different starting tomorrow? So a lot of reframing takes place where we're thinking about the future, we're thinking about people's needs and interests rather than their insistences about what's got to happen. We're also thinking about this notion of a shared responsibility to make the situation better, rather than it being about it's her fault, it's his fault, she's to blame, he's to blame, because that doesn't usually get you anywhere very positive if you just start playing blame tennis. So we're looking at reframing and also trying to draw out any areas of consensus. What have they agreed about? We have to listen carefully as mediators, get your mediator radar tuned into any little areas of apology or acceptance or acknowledgement about what's going on for the neighbour, any offers, any concessions. So we're listening very, very carefully for these as we reframe to keep their focus constantly on their underlying needs, the future of the neighbourly relationship, and also having a shared responsibility to make it better. And in the heat of all of that, sometimes we need to break out We need to go into separate rooms if either it gets too heated or we get stuck or people repeatedly break the rules. So we're going to see a short clip of the stage 5 with Carl and Alex, where they begin to negotiate the issues that have been identified at the end of stage 4. With these two guys, it's an educational film, and they get to an agreement pretty quickly in some sessions, and I'm sure that's in the experience of our audience today. It can be a little bit more heated and aggressive than this. Carl and Alex are quite sweet. But we see a little bit of the skill of the mediator in trying to get the discussion moving forwards, try and make sure that they both get treated equally. There's a point where Carl feels as if he's giving more ground, and it's the kind of thing that has to be addressed by the mediator. So let's just see a few of those skills in this short clip of the stage 5, where they're starting actually to have the negotiation. Second thing the two of you have brought, which is perhaps a bit more contentious, is about the rubbish in the corridor, about the bags in the corridor. Maybe you start on that one, Carl, and tell us what goes on there.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes if I'm in a rush, I'll leave the odd bag out, you know, and I know I shouldn't do it. It is a bit, you know, sort of a bit lazy on my part, but I heard you talking to like some of the neighbours about the noise and me complaining about the noise, and then obviously you mentioned my bags were out. But again, I just thought, well, stuff you then. I'll leave more bags out, and you know, I don't like the place looking like a tip, but it was just out of retaliation more than anything, if I'm honest. And again, I know it's not the most mature thing to do, but I didn't feel like I was getting anywhere with the noise. Like I don't think. Sorry to go back to the noise again, but I don't think you realise the sort of impact it has. And
okay. So talking of, we will come back to the noise in a moment, because if I can just keep your conversation on the bags in the corridor for a second. So you're saying about, you know, the impact that things that Alex does having an effect on you and your lifestyle. So maybe you just say a word about the bags and the impact that they have on you.
Yeah, I mean, I know you probably thought I was just gossiping with everyone else, you know, because I've been here a long time, but I'm not just thinking about myself and my visitors and other people's visitors and them. You know, it could endanger yourself, your own life. So, and you know, you're saying you've done it out of spite. You know, I don't think that's a very nice thing to do. But you need to be thinking it could endanger your own life. We don't need them out there. Can you not just either keep them in your flat until, you know, and then take them to the outdoor bins? You know, because it's health and safety, and I tell you, if the housing officer comes around and sees that, you know, you could end up with a letter. Yeah. You know, a bit of a warning, maybe.
So Alex is saying, you know, is it possible to keep the bags in your own flat and then to take them out without them sort of stockpiling in the corridor?
Yeah, I mean, again, I feel like I'm the only one compromising here, really. Like, that's two things I've said, all right. You know, this is how I worried it was going to go. You know, I'm the new guy. I'll comply with everybody else and step out of line.
Okay, I get that.
I don't feel like I'm getting anything back.
Okay, you know? I get that. And it feels like it's a bit one-sided so far. So maybe it might be the order that we've done things in, but if you can...
I'll take the rubbish, yeah, you know, fair play.
I guess if you can just respond to that, and then
it's endangering you as well as anybody else.
I know, it's just when you like make it dead dramatic, like about people burning stuff and stuff, it just winds me up. But I get it, you know, whatever. I'm
just, you know, being realistic, it is a fire hazard, it's health and safety. And I can assure you, if your housing officer saw that, you definitely would get a letter, or they would come and knock on your door and ask to speak to you and just say, can you move it? You know, I'm sure that would have been told to you when you first signed up for this property.
And so the negotiation progresses between the two. Like I say, they're making it quite easy. Often it's not as easy. People tend to get lodged in the past quite a lot, and to try and prove they're in the right and the other guy's in the wrong. They'll say, well, what about that day that this happened, and what about that other neighbour got involved and she'll back me up, and I've got a text from you that proves that you did this. And you know, we have that tendency to try and prove our version of events is correct. And I think it's based on trying to get us off the hook, the idea that somebody has to be right and somebody has to be wrong. And if I can prove that I'm not the one in the wrong, then that only leaves the role of being the one in the right. So we give all this evidence, all this history, all this trying to prove that I'm the good guy and the other one's the bad guy. Often people try and get the mediator on side as well. We call it hooking. So they're trying to come over as the reasonable one, the one that would reasonably behave in the ways that they have. Sometimes even asking the mediator quite directly, well, what would you do if somebody was playing music at 2 o'clock in the morning? So we work our way through that, and as you'll have seen in that phase, a bit of selective hearing from the mediator as well. Don't have to respond to everything, and sometimes the little barbed comments that they throw out, you can't easily do anything constructive with them, so I just don't hear them. We move then from the negotiation into thinking about whether we've got enough to take forward into an agreement, and in stage 6 we build the agreement. We pull together all of the offers they've made to one another, the concessions that they've put on the table, and any ideas they've got for how to improve the situation. So there's some ideas about what to do about the parking, there's a concession around the music, well I suppose this, I suppose that, and some offers about not leaving the rubbish in the corridor, taking it out as soon as, leaving it in the flat until it's ready to be taken down to the bins. All of these things need writing up into an agreement. Not that we're trying to formalise a process which is essentially informal, it's just that it's helpful to have a written record of what's been agreed, so that the memories, when memories fade, they will be back to the same version of the agreement, so there's no dispute around what it was they actually resolved at the end of the mediation. So we write it down so they have a record of what's been agreed, and we can make sure that it gets carried out. And just in case things go wrong, if the wheel comes off again, we have a fallback arrangement. So we would write into that agreement, what are you going to do if things go wrong between you again, and thinking about that as a safety net. And then finally we might consider alternative courses of action if the mediation hasn't fully resolved things, or if they need to get some further information, or if the two of them need jointly to go to the housing provider, for example, to get permission to do something in the flat. Like one case we were doing, it was about a bicycle being left in the common area, and the fellow couldn't leave it outside. He'd lost so many bicycles to theft that he couldn't get insurance anymore. So it was agreed he could store the bike indoors, provided it was out of the way and not tripping anybody up. So they needed the housing provider's permission so they could put a rack up on the wall and he could hang his bike up, just a couple of hooks in the hall so he could hang his bike up. So they jointly agreed to that. They jointly approached the landlord and it was fine. Landlord said, yeah, tickety-boo, you can put your hooks up, and that solved that little problem. So a very simple, low-level, basic thing that made sure these two guys didn't have to go into the formal stages of the landlord's procedures, and that they didn't have this ongoing conflict where they were tripping over each other's stuff in the hallway. So that's the kind of things that would go into the agreement. So let's take a quick look at the stage 6 and a short clip of Alex and Carl building their agreement. So what I'm going to do is just very briefly just draft out the points of agreement. We'll agree sort of the words of this for today, and then we can send this out to both of you as well so you get a copy. So the first one is to do with parking, and it's to do with getting the permits sorted. So you'll point Carl in the right direction for who he needs to speak to.
Help me with that.
Yeah,
figure out the permit. In the meantime, while the permit gets sorted out, Carl, you're going to park away from Alex's space.
Yeah.
You're not blocking her space. And if you're unhappy about Carl's parking at any point, you'll leave a note on the windscreen, but you'll make sure it's sort of polite and constructive, and sort of not telling him off because he's sort of felt told off about that. That will hopefully resolve the parking issue. But also, if your housing officer's aware of, what's going on, the ins and outs of that, and then hopefully you'll get support to sort out whatever it is with permits. I don't get involved in that.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm sure it's done. I'll just double check because I don't have much dealing with my housing officer really anyway, but I can sort that for you, that's fine.
Excellent. The bags, what you've said is, you've had a bit of an exchange there about how it concerns you about the bags, and you've been explaining what your motivation was behind leaving the bags there. So what you said you'll try and do is to keep the bags inside your flat until it's time to take them down to the bin store there.
I didn't realise I was doing it, but then after a bit I was doing it just to wind people up.
Alright then, so I've got that for the bags. And then the third thing was about the noise, and what you're going to do is for you to come down into the hallway so that you can hear at certain volumes what it sounds like downstairs. And then what you can do is sort of talk about moderating the volume, but also have a deal that midnight would be the time for music, and be aware of your shifts so that you will not be playing music late at night when you've got to be up for work. Okay, so that's the shifts for the music. couple of things there about coming down to listen to the volume, and then making sure that it's not at a disturbing level on the nights when Carl's got work in the morning club. There's an agreement with Carl and Alex. So then what we've got to do is to decide what we're going to do after the mediation session in our stage 7. We close things down. We think about who's going to see the agreement. It can often be helpful for the housing provider to see the agreement. The referrer, who might be a neighbourhood manager, a neighbourhood officer, a housing manager. So if they've referred the case, then they want to know that actually we've got to a good place with it. There is an agreement. The agreements are not anything highfalutin. It might be 3 bullet points. It might be a very brief summary about what's going to happen between the two parties. And it's down to the parties to agree whether they want to disclose that or not. If they choose to keep it private, then all the mediation provider would feed back to the organisation is, yeah, we've got a resolution, they've got an agreement which they're keeping to themselves, but they're aware of what's been agreed between the two of them. They'll try and stick to it. And then we will follow up after 6 weeks or so in order to see whether things are working. So we do like to follow up, not leave people just with their agreements and hope for the best. So after 6 weeks or so, we'd be in touch by email or text and would say, is the agreement working? Is everything okay? So let's just have a look at how the stage 7 plays out with Carl and Alex as we close the session down on their mediation. Okay, so that's the sort of form of words that we've agreed. Just take a look at that if the two of you are happy about that.
Yeah, that,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
And I'll ask you
fine.
just stick your name on the bottom there. It's just to agree that those are the words that we've used to describe where you've got to today. It's not a binding agreement. It's something that's just it's done in trust between you. So, you know, hopefully if you're getting on okay, there shouldn't be any problem with it.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So we're done then. So I will, with your consent then, I'll feed this back to your housing officer. You've agreed the form of words. And you'll get a copy of this, and your housing officer will get a copy.
So do you just post that? You'll just post that out to us?
You'll get that
Yeah.
posted to you, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And that should be that. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Well, well done the two of you. Thanks for coming along this afternoon and you know, giving that your best efforts, and hopefully that will work out for you, and we'll not need to have a similar conversation again in the future. All right.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
All right,
cheers.
Thank you.
There we have the session being closed down and talking about who's going to see the agreement and about the follow-up period with Carl and Alex. So that really brings to a close the 7-stage model, the sequence of steps and stages, right from the individual meeting all the way through to getting their agreement and agreeing about follow-up and who's going to see the agreement. So in essence, that's the 7-stage mediation in action, our showcase for neighbourhood mediation. In the chat box, my colleagues just put in a link there about Retalk, which is our model of mediation, and you can see that link appear there. There's a little bit more detail about the 7-stage model. And just to, in the last couple of minutes for us then, we want to think about any questions from anybody. We've had a couple of questions as we've gone along. If you don't want to do them just now or something occurs to you afterwards, you're very welcome to email your question into the address that's there in the chat box, webinar@ukmediation.net. So we usually get a couple of questions coming in at this point. Here's one from Trinity who says, "Hi Mike, is online mediation effective for these types of disputes, or would you say it's more suited to workplace?" You can do neighbourhood mediation, definitely, Trinity. The limitation is it's kind of hard to see how the dialogue builds between neighbours when you're doing online. Everybody's just looking down their cameras, looking in the same direction. You lose a lot of information. You miss the little subvocal noises, the tuts and the grunts and the ooh, and the noises people tend to make. Body language, of course, is missing, but it's kind of a bit stilted online because only one person can speak at a time. When we have discussions normally, we tend to talk over each other a little bit. We'll stop if somebody else wants to speak. We might have a quick to and fro between parties, a little exchange of ideas. It's very difficult to do that online when you've only got one microphone on at a time. But suffice to say, over the last 20 months, we have been using online mediation for neighbourhood disputes as well as workplace and commercial and intra-family disputes. It's fine. It works okay. I'm looking forward to mostly, getting back to face-to-face mediation. We've got a panel of mediators out there We're just starting now to see about 1 in 3 mediations are now going back face to face, and certainly I did one a few weeks ago, and it was a joy to be in a room with people after having done so much online. So yeah, in short, Trinity, it does work, and it is effective for neighbourhood issues as well as for workplace and commercial and other types of disputes as well. So if there are any further questions, very welcome to email them to us, don't be shy. And just to finish off for today, I'm going to mention in time-honoured tradition about a few webinars coming up. If you want the full list of webinars, and if you want to see any of our archived webinars as well, we've got a few years worth of lunchtime webinars on the website, so do go and have a look. It's all free. You'll find a variety of sort of areas of application and mediation on there, and if you want to sign up for future webinars, the link has just appeared in the chat box as well. So a quick skip through here. Friday 12th November, we're talking about in workplaces and organisations how different cultures and ethnic backgrounds and beliefs can all contribute to workplace disputes and how they can be resolved with mediation. So a lot to say about that one, about culture and conflict and collaboration in workplaces, and how the techniques of mediation can be used as a very impartial, very future focused, very equitable way of resolving disputes between people who may have different value sets, different beliefs, different ethical foundations. Then we're talking about back to homelessness prevention in December. We usually save this one for when it's getting cold. Terrible problem in the UK at the moment with families in crisis and people, especially youngsters, find themselves on the streets by virtue often of family breakdown, and the kinds of contexts in which people find themselves in poverty and in poor housing and poor employment prospects. But mostly we're looking at family conflict and how families who have disputes amongst themselves can end up with a youngster often choosing to leave or being ejected from the family home, and how we can try and prevent that. So it's all about homelessness prevention, consistent with recent legislation about using mediation to try and keep families together if possible, and that's what it's all about on Friday 10th of December. So full list of webinars in the link in the chat box. If you want to sign up, there's another link there. If you'd like to comment or question anything to do with today's webinar, then there's also an email address in there. So do keep in touch with us. We're about to wind up for today, so you can like and subscribe our YouTube channel, you can follow us on Twitter, you can check out our LinkedIn, or you can like and subscribe our Facebook. So we have been talking about Nightmare Neighbours, Mediation in Action, our showcase of neighbourhood mediation. I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks very much for your attendance and your participation, and look forward to seeing you next time we run one of our lunchtime webinars. Bye for now.